Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave. And tonight I'm hanging out with this.
Nerdarchy Ted. How you doing?
And we're going to jump in with Aether Skies. So Aether Skies is a game campaign setting that I've run several times now. Ted played in one of the campaigns and also helped shape that campaign and kind of what Aether Skies has become. We've run it in two different systems and we actually want to create a unique system for Aether Skies. So our primary focus is going to be on the setting and then figuring out what other systems we can run in it. Because originally we ran it in Open Legend, which is a generic role-playing game. And we made a bunch of stuff for it from that. There's links in the description so that you can check out Aether Skies, the campaign we did. I think there's like 13 sessions to the campaign. And I've also...
But beyond that, you also ran it at D&D in a castle this past summer. I'm sorry, not this past summer, but...
the thing is, no one goes to the surface. It's dangerous when they send expeditions down there. If they do return, they usually return with less people that went to begin with. So they try not to do that anymore. Also, the 13 cities are kind of xenophobic, so much so that a war kind of broke out at one point and the 13th city fell, leaving only 12 cities. The campaign kicks off with the 13th city returning into this area of gloom. And, again, like they've sent a couple expeditions to see what happened and how the city came back. And it was not successful at all. Matter of fact, the beginning of the game is you guys having done a little bit of exploration into Haven, and you realize there's all kinds of horrific things there, and they have to flee.
It was a lot of fun to play that game. You've actually spent a lot more time kind of delving back into, the old lore, not only for, running it as a D&D campaign, using our old characters as NPCs to one regard or another within the setting. So I just remember the general vibe and how awesome of a setting it was and how great of a game it was for the campaign, but the specifics of the individual episodes are kind of loosey-goosey in my mind.
Yeah. And I had to do a little work to convert some of the systems that we used from Open Legend back into 5e D&D because this particular setting deals a lot with insanity and corruption, right? Like it is a very high magic world. Not in the sense that there's a lot of powerful magic, but it's more widespread. It also has kind of replaced technology. It's kind of like Ebron in a lot of ways.
Magic in the little things.
Yeah. So in this world, we call magic Aether. Aether is everywhere's, and are the folks that basically turn it into technology. It's actually the safest way to use it. But you can also be an Aether mage, right? You can wield the power and draw Aether into you. And this allows you to basically use more power than you normally would have. In D&D terms, you can overpower your spellcasting. The problem with doing that is the more you draw Aether, the more you want to draw it, and it will eventually burn out your brain and drive you insane, which kind of happened a little bit in our campaign, if you go and check that out. Also, there was other ways that in the campaign that you see how Aether could be very detrimental to wielding in its raw form. So, I kind of had to make up rules for 5e, and basically what those rules were, they allowed you to break the rules with limit use when it came to the stuff, or actually pumping up your spellcasting and things of that nature, but at a cost, right? Every time you did that, you had to make saving throws. Now, saving throws begin to affect your sanity. If you go too far, your character will no longer be playable as a PC and might become an NPC and have to be handed over. Oddly enough, when I ran it at D&D in a castle, no one pushed this at all. No one wanted to mess with it at all, and I was very disappointed.
But, looking back, if you're familiar with the channel, you obviously know who Robin is. And Robin played Dr. Lucy, one of my favorite characters from playing back there. I loved the arc that Dr. Lucy wound up having. And, from almost the get-go, it was like, oh no, I'm an Aetherfleister. I was an Aetherfleister. They were an Aethermancer. And they're like, let's do this. And, they pushed, and you just watched this arc happen throughout the whole thing. And it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
You gotta buy into those concepts.
Dr. Lucy took on insanity and corruption throughout the campaign, but Krezk, our resident kobold super soldier, also in Aether Skies, psionics are prevalent as well, which psionics really didn't start happening until the return of that fallen city. And Krezk is one of those that was psionically gifted. But Krezk also did some very risky things that caused him to also take on corruption as well. So, and then also, actually, you got a little bit too, but yours was less voluntary.
Yeah, mine was a little bit less voluntary. And I think, again, my character was attached to Dr. Lucy in a lot of different ways, and I was the Aetherfleister. So, I used technology to kind of buffer the corruption that is Aether, but you're not completely immune. There's still that stuff.
And also Bunny had his own issues.
Bunny was a little bit of a nutcase who had a little bit of a wackadoo story, and I, just as much as I love Lucy's arc, Bunny's was a lot of fun to play with as well.
So let's talk a little bit about adventures and play style that we think the setting is kind of supported by.
Sure. So as Dave says, it's a combination of Eldritch horror, fantasy, and steampunk. So with 13 floating cities, the majority of your campaigns, as I view them, you've got several different arcs that you can play with. You can stay within the city and do all kinds of urban awesomeness. Monsters can still be there because it's Eldritch horror. That things can kind of appear as need be. Things can attack the cities, but it can be a very political game as well. So like you can definitely handle like a high social game. You can definitely play with exploration and getting on your sailing vessels, your Aether ships, and you'll have a lot of cool campaign fights out in the skies of whatever kind of things are out there. You can also go super crazy and be like, let's do what our campaign did at some point in time, and we're gonna go explore the surface and see what's down there and what have you. So like you could kind of gain access to a little bit more traditional, get off the ship and explore unknown territories and what have you. So you can do an awful lot with these games, or with this setting, because there's so many different avenues of exploring it.
One of the aspects that, was leaned into both times that I've run this was the idea that you're crewing an Aether ship, right? So one of the great things about the Aether ships is they don't require nearly as much manpower to in order to operate that a traditional ship would, because of it's kind of powered by magic, if you would, making it kind of lend itself to a smaller crew, which is great for an RPG, right? Whenever I think of an RPG, I think one of the things you have to think about when you design it is, how are these people coming together? How are they going to interact and do it? Like, for instance, like one of my issues with espionage games, unless you run them all like heists, it's really tough and difficult to justify like 5 or 6 people working on a team, for espionage. Because once you get beyond 1 or 2, it definitely feels like more like a Black Ops or a heist type deal, right? So when we think about when we're creating RPGs, we want to think about like what's going to bring the players together and their characters. So this kind of makes sense. And, you don't have to like shoehorn a group of people together to get them playing and having fun with an adventure.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I enjoy about this setting.
There's definitely other ways you could go about it. You could be investigators. You could be explorers. You could kind of run it in a D&D-esque kind of way. We do use a lot of fantasy races. We had kobolds, humans, elves, and dwarves, in the games that we've run previously. In the 5e version, obviously I opened it up to everyone playing kind of whatever they wanted to race-wise. And they kind of made that real easy for me because pretty much all but I believe one of the players was from another place, like another, another world.
So, that's an aspect of being able to look at is to, because we're dealing with, a set world, having something that you somehow manifested from somewhere else, that means you don't have the preset knowledge and you get to do the full exploration pillar because everything is brand new to you, but then from the other side is if we're developing this as a setting, whether it be for D&D or for, its own system, we want to figure out, well, what does that mean for us? What races do we want to have, that are here so that we have something that is unique more than just, there's 13 floating cities and blah, 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 to have a setting that feels real. Everything needs to feel natural. And I know Dave and I have already begun, kind of discussing some things, and I tossed it out an idea that was like, oh, well, here's a nugget of a breadcrumb, thing. And he's like, oh, well, what if we did this instead? And, I don't know whether you want to tease that idea or not.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So like I had mentioned, playing Bunny, who was a kobold who wore bunny ears just because he had a very evil master and what have you. And it just kind of stuck. So I'm like, oh, well, what if I played a Herringon, when we play Aether Skies as a kind of nod to Bunny? And he's like, oh, well, that's cool and all, but like, if we were to create this to be, its own setting, what would a Herringon be in Aether Skies? So, we turned our brains on. It's like, well, what if, there are races that are corrupt and we basically have, and we'll come up with a cool name, but basically you have beast folk that are essentially those descended almost like tieflings, somewhere in your line, someone was corrupted and you pop looking like something that's not, not natural, and that could have its own connotations as to, for public perception. Some people might be, jaded or, untrustworthy of those that are beast men or beast folk or what have you. Others could just, not care, but it's a whole nother layer of, interest when you have these things.
Yeah. So that's definitely an area you want to explore. Also, like one of the things we came up with that's kind of unique to Aether Skies is we created a sports league that all of the major, have a pro team for a game called Etherball. And it's kind of like ice hockey meets lacrosse plus magic, right? So like, matter of fact, when we were talking about our first campaign, it would take us many years later before we finally did have a sports game. But that's like also another, that's another thing that can be explored in Aether Skies. And also because the cities are still very xenophobic, one of the few instances where they do seem to set aside their distrust and their xenophobia is for the game of Etherball. And it also becomes like, a place where, back alley deals can be made, diplomatic moves can be made. And it is one of the few times that the other cities and their citizens actually interact with you. But I mean, that's pretty much a good overview of Aether Skies, I think, for now.
Sure. I think that's it's a good thing that we've got going on, a good tease for as we begin to develop, content both here on the channel and on the website related to a cool game.
So until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.